He looked me in the eye and said, "This house isn't yours anymore. Get out." In that moment, years of trust, sacrifice, and family promises shattered like glass. Betrayal has a way of cutting deeper than any blade, and what happened next would turn grief into a battle for justice. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. I never imagined that at 68, I would be left standing alone in a house that once pulsed with laughter and life. My name is Edward Miller, and I taught history at a Seattle high school for more than 3 decades before retiring. I had lived a quiet life with my daughter Emily, who was the center of my world. The house by Lake Washington, with its cedar beams and wide windows, was our haven. She used to run down to the dock as a little girl, her hair flying in the wind, shouting for me to come watch the sun set over the water. Even now, I can almost hear her voice echoing across the lake. The neighborhood around us was like many suburban communities: trim lawns, familiar faces waving as they walked their dogs, the occasional barbecue in summer. But inside my house, everything had changed. Emily's sudden death in a car accident had sucked the air out of every room. The silence pressed down on me, heavier than any burden I had ever known. It wasn't the stillness of peace, but the kind that crackles with absence, where every sound reminds you of what's gone. Each morning I still took my walk along the lake, my cane tapping against the path. But now the memories crowded me. I remembered Emily as a little girl balancing on her bicycle, shouting proudly when she finally rode without training wheels. I remembered her as a teenager hunched over textbooks at the kitchen table, scribbling equations until long past midnight. I remembered her as the grown woman who dared to start her own company, focused on renewable energy, fighting through rejection after rejection, until she built something valued at $33 million. That number meant little to me. To me, her true wealth was her determination, her restless mind, and her unyielding hope for the future. After the funeral, friends and colleagues came to the house to pay respects. Some stayed to reminisce, others offered casseroles and awkward words of comfort. I sat quietly, absorbing their condolences like a man underwater, unable to surface. My son-in-law, Ryan Collins, moved through the crowd with polished ease. He shook hands, smiled tightly, and spoke in a tone too businesslike for the occasion. Where I saw grief, he seemed to see opportunity. I told myself that people grieve differently, that perhaps keeping busy was his way of coping. Yet the way his eyes darted toward investors, the way he said Emily's work must move forward with an almost rehearsed certainty, unsettled me deeply. Ryan was the opposite of Emily. Where she was earnest and visionary, he was slick and practical, always talking about market potential and streamlining. Emily had loved him, though I never fully understood why. I respected her choice because she seemed happy, but I often wondered if she saw in him something I could not. Now, without her presence to soften his edges, I felt the chill beneath his carefully tailored exterior. The house itself seemed to mirror my loss. Emily's bedroom remained untouched, her sketch pads filled with diagrams of turbines and solar grids stacked neatly on her desk. The scent of her lavender lotion lingered faintly in the hallway. Downstairs, the cedar-framed living room held photographs of her life: graduation, her first patent framed on the wall, our fishing trips where she always managed to catch more than I did. Each object was heavy with meaning, and I clung to them like lifelines. The lakeside property had always been more than real estate. It was where Emily and I built a life together, stone by stone. I remembered her mother, gone too soon, planting the first rose bushes near the porch. I remembered the nights we stayed up repairing the dock after a storm, Emily hammering nails with stubborn determination. To me, this house was not just wood and glass. It was memory, heritage, promise. Without it, I would be adrift. It was during one of those quiet evenings, the lake reflecting the silver of a clouded moon, that Ryan came into the room. He placed a hand firmly on my shoulder, the pressure of it more possessive than comforting. With a smile that didn't reach his eyes, he said, "Emily always wanted us to move forward, Edward. You'll see. It's for the best." The words echoed in my mind long after he left the room. Forward, I thought. But what does forward mean to him? I felt unease stirring, a whisper of something darker beneath the surface. I had lost my daughter, but perhaps I was about to lose much more. At that moment, I didn't yet understand the magnitude of the storm approaching. All I knew was that the air in the house had shifted, and I was no longer certain I belonged within its walls. If you're still watching and feeling the weight of this family bond, please comment number 1 below so I know you're with me. Now, let's move on to point number 2. The week after Emily's funeral felt like a blur of gray mornings and restless nights. The flood of visitors who had once filled the house with condolences and casseroles dwindled until silence returned. But it wasn't the silence of grief I had expected. It was something colder, harder, like the air had shifted into someone else's possession. I began to feel like a guest, rather than the father who had built a life inside these walls with his daughter. Ryan no longer dressed in black. Within days, his tailored suits were back, freshly pressed and gleaming, as though mourning were nothing more than an appointment crossed off his calendar. He moved through the house with an energy that unsettled me. He spoke on the phone constantly, his voice clipped and commanding, making arrangements with people I didn't know. There was no reverence for Emily's memory, no pause to honor the woman who had built this home and this company with so much heart. Instead, the atmosphere felt like a corporate boardroom waiting for its next transaction. The first shock came when Ryan hosted a gathering at the house. I thought it would be a small memorial, perhaps a few friends who wanted to share stories about Emily. Instead, strangers poured into the living room, their laughter echoing across the cedar beams. Champagne glasses clinked as conversations turned to contracts, ventures, and projections. I sat quietly on the edge of the sofa, invisible among them. Not one person asked me about Emily. They leaned toward Ryan, hanging on his every word, nodding as he referred to his house, his company, his plans. Each phrase cut me deeper. Later that night, I found Ryan at the door of Emily's study, a brass key turning in the lock. The sound pierced me like a gunshot. That room had been her sanctuary, the place where she sketched designs late into the night, where her notebooks overflowed with ideas about wind turbines and solar arrays. "Why are you locking the room?" I asked, my voice low but firm. He didn't hesitate. "Because the past has no use. We need to move forward." The words hung in the air, cold and final. I stared at the locked door, the brass gleaming under the hallway light, and felt as though he had bolted shut the last living piece of my daughter. It didn't stop there. In the following days, Ryan began redecorating. Family photos vanished from the mantel. Boxes appeared in the hallway, filled with Emily's books, her trinkets from childhood, even framed certificates she had once been so proud of. He spoke of modernizing the house, hiring designers to create a clean slate. It was as though he were scrubbing Emily out of existence, one artifact at a time. The neighbors who dropped by for visits noticed the change. They whispered awkwardly, asking me quietly if I was all right, their eyes darting toward the unfamiliar cars parked in the driveway, and the loud laughter spilling from the back patio where Ryan entertained his new circle of friends. Their concern mirrored my own unease. I no longer recognized the house by the lake. It felt hijacked, its warmth stripped and replaced with an icy ambition. One evening, Ryan confronted me directly. His words were delivered with the same polished tone he used in business meetings, but the meaning cut like a knife. "Edward, you've had your time here. The estate is mine now. You'll need to start planning your next chapter." I was stunned. This was Emily's home, our home. "You can't just," he interrupted smoothly. "I can, and I will." It's what Emily would have wanted. The arrogance in his voice left me trembling. It wasn't just the dismissal of my place in the home. It was the ease with which he twisted Emily's memory to justify his cruelty. My daughter had once told me she wanted this house to be a safe place for us both, a refuge no matter what happened in the world. Now, her promise was being dismantled brick by brick. That night, I sat alone in the darkened hallway, staring at the locked door of Emily's study. I thought about her last words to me before the accident, her voice soft but resolute. "Dad, I've prepared everything so you'll never be alone." At the time, I thought she meant the company, her savings, maybe even just the comfort of knowing she had lived fully. But as I replayed those words, I realized she had meant something more. She had known Ryan's true nature. She had seen the storm before it arrived. The realization gripped me with equal parts fear and hope. Fear because I understood Ryan's next move would be to erase me completely from this house, perhaps even from Emily's legacy. Hope because her words suggested she had prepared for this betrayal, leaving behind some safeguard I had not yet discovered. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the study door and whispered into the silence, "Emily, whatever you left for me, I'll find it. I promise." That was the night I understood. Ryan wasn't finished with me. He was only beginning. The rain had returned to Seattle the morning Ryan made his move. I woke to the sound of unfamiliar footsteps in the hallway, not the quiet tread of neighbors or friends, but the heavy boots of hired movers. When I stepped into the living room, I froze. My belongings, my chair, the same one where I had read Emily bedtime stories when she was little, was being hauled toward the door. Beside it, a box of fishing rods I had kept for decades clattered against the hardwood floor. Those rods weren't just wood and metal, they were summers by the lake, Emily squealing with delight when she caught her first trout, her mother laughing beside us. Now, they were being handled like junk. "Edward," Ryan's voice cut through the chaos. He stood at the center of the room, dressed in a crisp suit, arms folded as if he were overseeing an office relocation. His smile was tight, rehearsed. "It's time you faced reality. This is my home now. You'll want to get used to living on your pension. The estate belongs to me," I swallowed hard, my heart hammering in my chest. "This was Emily's home," I managed, my voice steady despite the fire inside me. "Our home. You can't erase her like this." Ryan's expression didn't flicker. "The past is clutter," he said coldly. "Your clutter. And I won't let this place rot under the weight of old photographs and broken dreams. It's time to move forward." His words landed like blows. I looked around the room, at the walls that had once echoed with Emily's laughter, now stripped bare of family photos. Even her certificates, the frame patent she had been so proud of, had been boxed away. What I saw wasn't modernization, it was erasure. By afternoon, the movers had piled my few remaining belongings into a single suitcase. When the front door shut behind me, I found myself standing in the drizzle, the suitcase at my feet, watching water drip from the eaves of the house I had called home for decades. The lawn was still manicured, the lake still shimmered faintly through the mist, but to me it felt foreign, cold, hostile. A neighbor glanced over from across the street, eyes wide with sympathy, but quickly looked away. No one wanted to get involved. I stood there for a long time, the rain soaking through my coat, until memory broke through the numbness. I saw Emily in my mind as clearly as if she were standing beside me. It was the night before her final trip, the last conversation we'd had. She had placed her hand over mine and whispered, "Dad, I've prepared everything so you'll never be alone." At the time, I'd thought she meant the comfort of knowing she loved me, or perhaps the security of her success. But now, with my suitcase dripping on the curb, I realized her words had carried a warning. Emily had known Ryan, she had seen this day coming. The thought planted a seed of resolve in me. I refused to believe she would abandon me to his cruelty. If she had prepared something, then I had to find it. That evening, I took a cab across town to see Margaret Hale, Emily's longtime lawyer and friend. Margaret had known Emily since law school and had advised her through every step of building her company. She welcomed me into her office, her eyes softening when she saw the dampness of my clothes, the fatigue etched across my face. "Edward," she said gently, "I heard what happened. Sit down." I told her everything. Ryan's words, the movers, the locked study. My voice shook only once when I described the moment I stood outside in the rain with nothing but a suitcase. Margaret listened without interruption, her hands folded on her desk. When I finished, she sighed. Emily was far smarter than Ryan ever gave her credit for. She anticipated things like this. But we need patience. If you rush in, we risk losing the protections she put in place." Her words steadied me. Emily had not left me defenseless. Somewhere, hidden in the folds of her careful planning, was a safeguard, a lifeline she had built for me. All I had to do was trust her foresight and bide my time. I left Margaret's office with a strange sense of calm. The rain was still falling as I walked back to the motel where I had rented a small room. The neon sign buzzed overhead, its light flickering across the wet pavement. I carried my suitcase inside and placed it by the door. For a long moment, I stared at it, at the soaked leather that smelled of damp earth. Then I whispered, "This isn't the end, Emily. It's only the beginning." In that dim motel room, I felt the faint stirrings of something stronger than grief, resolve. I was no longer simply a father in mourning. I was becoming something else. A man ready to fight for his daughter's legacy, for justice, and for the promise she had left behind. The motel room where I now lived was a far cry from the lakeside home Emily and I had built memories in. The thin curtains fluttered with each draft. The neon sign from the diner across the street buzzed without pause, and the smell of stale carpet seemed to cling to my clothes. Yet, in that bleak space, I began to gather myself. Humiliation still weighed on me, but something sturdier had taken root beneath it, a determination not to let Ryan erase Emily's life, or me along with it. I started with the people who had known her best outside our family, her colleagues at Cascade Innovations. They had been like a second family to her, working late nights, fueled by bad coffee, and her relentless belief that renewable energy could change lives. I reached out, calling one after another. Some answered warmly at first, offering condolences, but their voices shifted the moment I mentioned Ryan. They lowered their tones, apologized, and explained that things were complicated. One even admitted, "Ryan's already taking control. If we speak out, we'll lose our jobs." Their sympathy was genuine, but their fear was greater. Unsatisfied, I decided to visit Cascade Innovations myself. The building was sleek and glass-fronted, standing tall against the Seattle skyline. Emily had once brought me here proudly, showing me the lab where her team tinkered with prototypes, the office walls covered with her sketches. Walking up to those doors now felt like approaching her spirit, but when I tried to enter, 2 security guards stopped me. "Mr. Collins has given strict orders," one said, his tone professional but firm. "No unauthorized access." "I'm her father," I argued. "Emily built this place. I just want to see her files." The guard shook his head, almost apologetically. "I'm sorry, sir. You'll need clearance." The sting was sharp. I wasn't just excluded from my home. I was locked out of my daughter's life's work. As I turned away, I noticed Ryan's name already displayed on new signage inside the lobby, as if he were the visionary and founder. It was theft in plain sight, and I could do nothing. That evening, I met with Margaret Hale again. She sat across from me, her office dim except for the desk lamp illuminating neat stacks of papers. She explained that the will we had seen wasn't the whole picture. Emily had prepared a contingency, a safeguard, but it wasn't automatic. "Edward," she said carefully, "Ryan has to expose himself. If we act too soon, the protections she put in place won't trigger. Patience is everything." Her words made sense, but they tasted bitter. How could I wait while Ryan desecrated Emily's memory? My instincts screamed to confront him, to shout the truth in his face. But then, as if guided by fate, I remembered the leather satchel Ryan hadn't bothered to take from me when he forced me out. I pulled it from the corner of my motel room that night and opened it. Inside, beneath old papers and a photograph of Emily and me on a fishing trip, was a sealed envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter inside was handwritten in Emily's familiar script. "Dad, if you're reading this, trust Margaret. Trust the plan. Remember what you always told me. Strength is quiet, but it endures. Don't let anger blind you. Wait, and the truth will rise." Tears blurred my vision. It wasn't a legal document, but it was more powerful than any contract. It was her voice guiding me from beyond. She had known Ryan's nature and had left me a compass. Armed with her words, I attempted one last push on my own. I attended a public investor meeting where Ryan was set to present his vision for Cascade Innovations. The room was packed with polished suits and eager eyes. Ryan spoke confidently, painting himself as the natural heir to Emily's brilliance. His words twisted her legacy into his platform. I couldn't remain silent. I stood, my voice breaking the polished rhythm of his speech. You speak of innovation, but it was Emily who dreamed this company into existence. Without her, you'd have nothing. And without honoring her legacy, you're nothing. The room went still. Ryan's smile tightened. He leaned into the microphone and said smoothly, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is my father-in-law." He's grieving and confused. We all respect Emily's memory, but we must face facts. Her vision needs strong leadership. Unfortunately, clinging to the past doesn't create progress. Laughter rippled across the room, polite but sharp. My words had been turned against me. I sat down, humiliated, the sting of his dismissal burning deep. Back in my motel that night, I unfolded Emily's letter once more. Her words steadied me. She had always planned 2 steps ahead, and now I understood what she asked of me. The fight wasn't about shouting louder, it was about patience, about letting Ryan's arrogance become his downfall. I set the letter on the nightstand and whispered, "You always planned ahead, Emily. Now it's my turn to follow your lead." For the first time in weeks, I felt not defeated, but prepared. The battle would be long, but I was ready to endure. The weeks that followed were a strange mixture of stillness and rumbling anticipation. Outwardly, I lived a quiet existence in the motel, taking long walks to pass the time, reading history books late into the night. But beneath that stillness was a current of growing tension. Margaret's advice and Emily's letter echoed in my mind. Wait, endure, let arrogance undo itself. And Ryan, my smug, self-assured son-in-law, was proving arrogant enough to play right into her design. Word spread quickly about the party Ryan was planning at the lakeside house. He sent invitations to investors, journalists, and a parade of wealthy acquaintances who had appeared in his orbit since Emily's passing. I, of course, was not invited. Instead, I learned of the event through whispers from neighbors who seemed equal parts disturbed and fascinated by the spectacle. On the night of the party, I stood across the street under the cover of a tree. The house glowed with light, laughter spilling out through the tall windows. It looked nothing like the home I remembered. Emily's study, once a sanctuary of papers and books, had been stripped bare, its warmth gutted and replaced with cold chrome furniture. Family photographs were gone. In their place hung abstract art that said nothing, meant nothing. Where there had once been life, there was now only sterile display. I watched the guests arrive in sleek cars, their laughter echoing across the driveway. Ryan stood at the door, shaking hands like a seasoned politician, his smile wide, his eyes sharp with triumph. Inside, champagne glasses clinked while music pulsed. I could almost hear Emily's voice whispering in my ear, "Strength is quiet, but it endures." The climax of the night came with Ryan's grand speech. He stood on the staircase landing, wine glass in hand, looking down at his audience like a conquering general. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, "Cascade Innovations is entering a new era. Under my leadership, we will expand beyond Emily's narrow vision. Tonight marks the beginning of that future." His words, smug and hollow, drew applause. I clenched my fists in the shadows. Then came the moment that changed everything. In front of his guests, Ryan signed an agreement with a group of foreign investors. The deal would sell off part of Cascade Innovations' intellectual property, technology Emily had poured her soul into, to buyers who had no interest in her dream, only in profit. Margaret had warned me that the will contained a fiduciary clause. The inheritor was bound to protect the legacy, not dismantle it. Selling those patents was more than greedy, it was the fatal mistake. I didn't need to wait long for confirmation. That very night, Margaret called me. Her voice was sharp with urgency. "Edward," she said, "he's done it. That contract breaches Emily's clause. The safeguards are active. Everything she prepared is in motion." A strange calm washed over me. For weeks I had endured humiliation and loss. Now, at last, the tide was turning. The next day, Margaret met me with documents that bore Emily's foresight in every line. She explained that Emily had even secured her original patents, notes, and confidential legal files on a hidden server system installed in the house itself. Ryan, in his arrogance, had overlooked it during his renovations. That server, untouched, would become the key evidence proving his betrayal. That evening, I walked back to the house. The party had ended, but its echoes still lingered. Discarded glasses on the lawn, laughter fading into the night. Ryan stood at the gate, his face flushed with triumph. When he saw me, his smile twisted into a sneer. "You really should move on, Edward," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You're nothing but a relic. The world doesn't need men like you anymore." I met his gaze steadily. And yet, relics outlast empires built on greed. For a moment, silence stretched between us. His jaw tightened, but he didn't reply. He turned and walked back into the house, slamming the gate behind him. As I walked away into the cool night, I felt no anger, only resolve. Margaret's words replayed in my head. "It's time. Ryan has triggered everything Emily put in place." Across the lake, the lights of the house flickered against the water. Inside, Ryan believed he had won. But outside, under the quiet night sky, I knew the true storm was gathering. Emily's plan was alive, her legacy was protected, and I was ready to carry out her final design. The morning after Ryan's party, the city's papers ran glossy photos of him standing at the top of the staircase, wine glass raised high. The headlines called him a visionary, a bold new leader. Not once did they mention Emily, except as the late founder whose company had found its rightful successor. I read the articles with a sick twist in my stomach. Every word felt like a theft of her name, her work, her memory. Margaret called me into her office that afternoon. I sat across from her, the steady tick of the wall clock filling the silence as she opened a thick folder. She slid it toward me, her expression both grave and steady. "Edward," she said, "Ryan has done exactly what Emily predicted he would. By selling off those patents, he violated his fiduciary duty. The contingency clause is active. Everything Emily built into her will is now in motion." I leaned back in the chair, stunned. For weeks I had endured humiliation, waiting, watching. Now, the moment had arrived. "So, what happens next?" I asked. She folded her hands. "That depends on you. We have two options. We can act now, expose him publicly, file in court, use the server's contents as evidence. The blow would be sharp and immediate. Or," she paused, "we can wait. Allow him to grow more reckless. Let his greed blind him completely, so that when the fall comes, there is no way out." The choice sat heavy on my chest. Strike now or endure more. My heart screamed to fight immediately, to reclaim Emily's legacy before Ryan twisted it further. But my mind heard her voice, that last promise before she left for her final trip. "Dad, I've prepared everything so you'll never be alone." Margaret must have seen my hesitation. She reached into her drawer and placed a small flash drive on the desk. "Emily left you something," she said quietly. I stared at it, unsure, then plugged it into her computer. The screen lit up, and there she was, my daughter, Alaru, in moving image and voice. My breath caught in my throat. Emily sat at her desk, her hair tied back, her eyes sharp and certain. "Dad," she began, her tone calm, deliberate. "If you are watching this, it means Ryan has betrayed everything. You'll want to act fast, I know, but don't. Justice isn't just about winning, it's about making the truth undeniable. Let him show the world exactly who he is. Only then will our plan hold." I couldn't move. Tears blurred the screen as her voice washed over me, both a wound and a balm. She had thought of everything, even my impatience, even my grief. When the video ended, silence filled the office. I wiped my face and turned to Margaret. My voice was hoarse but steady. "If Emily had this much faith and patience, then so will I. We'll wait." Margaret nodded, though her eyes softened with sympathy. "It won't be easy. He'll grow bolder, he'll humiliate you further, but in the end, his arrogance will be his undoing. I left her office with the flash drive in my pocket. The image of Emily burned into my mind. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on me, but beneath it was something else, a clarity, a sense of alignment with her will. For the first time since her death, I felt as though I was walking step for step with her again. That evening, in the dim glow of my motel room, I replayed the video. Emily's eyes seemed to meet mine each time, steady and unwavering. I whispered into the quiet, "I'll follow your lead, Emily." This isn't about revenge. It's about justice. Across town, Ryan was already planning his next spectacle. News trickled in that he would headline an international energy conference in San Francisco, presenting himself as the sole heir of Cascade Innovations and unveiling his new vision. The irony was not lost on me. He was walking into the perfect stage for his downfall. I closed my laptop and sat back on the creaking mattress. The motel walls were thin, the neon signs still buzzing, but I felt something stronger than comfort. I felt purpose. The choice was made. I would endure. I would wait. And when the time came, I would strike not with anger, but with the truth Emily had so carefully left behind. "Patience," Emily had said. "Strength is quiet, but it endures." Those words played in my mind like a refrain as I watched Ryan tighten his grip on everything she had built. It wasn't easy. Every headline that praised him as Cascade Innovations' bold new leader was a knife. Every photograph of him smiling in front of the house by the lake felt like an erasure of Emily's life. And yet, I endured because I knew her plan required him to walk further into the trap she had left. Ryan wasted no time proving her right. With Emily gone and the ink barely dry on the contracts he had signed, he began to revel in his newfound role as master of both fortune and company. A sleek black car arrived at the house, followed by another, until the driveway looked like a showroom. Caterers came and went. The sounds of clinking glasses and loud laughter echoed late into the night. I passed by once on my evening walk and caught sight of strangers drinking champagne in Emily's living room. The oak bookshelves had been stripped bare. Where her framed patent once hung, Ryan had installed a massive television. His extravagance didn't stop at the house. Local papers began covering his dinners at the city's most expensive restaurants, where he entertained investors and new acquaintances who had materialized the moment he inherited Emily's estate. I knew their type, hangers-on, smiling at his jokes while their eyes measured his wallet. They toasted him as a visionary, but I could see what they really were, leeches waiting to take what they could before disappearing. It was painful, yes, but also predictable. For all his arrogance, Ryan had no discipline. Emily had worked tirelessly, investing profits into scholarships, community programs, and renewable projects. Ryan funneled money into flashy purchases and hollow displays of wealth. Slowly, people began to notice. The first signs were small, barely whispers. A local journalist who had once covered Emily's community initiatives wrote a blog post questioning whether her legacy was being honored. Cascade Innovations, she wrote, was built on vision and responsibility. Are those values still alive under new leadership? Neighbors who had admired Emily's open-door kindness now muttered about the constant parties and luxury cars roaring through the once quiet street. Inside Cascade, the cracks grew deeper. Margaret showed me anonymous notes that had been slipped under her office door, tips from employees too frightened to go public. Ryan was siphoning company funds for personal expenses. He had authorized consulting fees to shell companies that looked suspiciously like his own accounts. He thought himself untouchable, but every move left a trail. Emily had trusted that arrogance would be his undoing, and now the evidence was piling up quietly, almost without effort. Still, it was agony to watch. Nights in the motel grew long. I lay awake listening to the neon sign buzz outside, wondering if Emily would forgive my inaction. Was I honoring her plan or simply hiding in fear? I kept her letter folded on the nightstand and played her video on my laptop when doubt gnawed at me. Each time, her steady gaze and calm voice reminded me the truth had to be undeniable. Then the consequences began to show in ways even Ryan couldn't ignore. A charitable foundation Emily had founded withdrew from its partnership with Cascade. issuing a terse public statement about differences in leadership values. Investors whispered uneasily when Ryan's spending hit the tabloids. At a board meeting, one of Cascade's most respected engineers resigned abruptly, citing irreconcilable differences. Those words spread quickly, seeding doubt in places Ryan thought were secure. The tide was turning, but Ryan, blinded by his own self-importance, didn't see it. He doubled down, hosting bigger events, driving faster cars, and stamping his name on every press release. To him, power meant permanence. To me, it was the sound of a structure creaking under its own weight. One night, as I sat in my motel room surrounded by the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the buzz of neon outside, the phone rang. I hesitated before answering. It was late, and few people called me now. "Mr. Collins," a voice said, nervous but determined. "This is Laura, Emily's assistant. I don't know who else to trust. I need to see you. Ryan isn't just careless, he's dangerous. I have proof." Her voice trembled, but her words struck like lightning. Proof, not whispers, not suspicions, but something tangible. "When?" I asked, my throat tightening. "Tomorrow morning," she replied. "Meet me at the cafe by the waterfront. Don't tell anyone." As I hung up, the room felt charged with energy. For weeks I had endured, waiting, gathering strength. Now, the cracks in Ryan's empire were widening, and the truth Emily had trusted to rise was beginning to surface. I sat back, staring at the glow of the neon outside. For the first time in months, I felt anticipation instead of despair. The consequences were no longer distant. They were here, real, and tomorrow they would begin to take shape in my hands. The cafe by the waterfront was quiet that morning, its windows streaked with mist from the bay. I arrived early, choosing a table near the back where I could watch the door. My hands trembled slightly as I wrapped them around a mug of black coffee. Every nerve in me was on edge, not because I feared Ryan directly, but because meeting Laura felt like stepping into the next stage of Emily's plan. When she arrived, she moved quickly, her coat pulled tight, eyes darting to every corner of the room. She slid into the seat across from me, her voice low. "Mr. Collins, thank you for coming. I don't have much time." Laura had been Emily's assistant for nearly 5 years. I remembered Emily speaking warmly of her, describing her as hardworking, loyal, and bright. Now, sitting across from me, she looked more like someone carrying a burden too heavy for her young shoulders. She reached into her bag and placed a manila folder on the table. "These are copies of emails and internal memos," she whispered. "Ryan has been diverting funds from Cascade into shell companies. He calls them consulting fees, but it's all personal spending. Luxury cars, renovations, offshore accounts. It's blatant theft." I opened the folder with shaking hands. Page after page detailed transfers, invoices, and signatures. My stomach twisted as I scanned Ryan's initials approving every move. Laura leaned closer, her voice barely audible. "I also have recordings, meetings where he mocked Emily's vision. He called her legacy sentimental baggage and told the board she was holding the company back." The words struck me harder than I expected. I had always known Ryan resented Emily's brilliance, but hearing that he dismissed her life's work as nothing more than baggage ignited a grief that burned like fire. I closed the folder carefully and looked at Laura. "Why now?" I asked. "Why come forward?" Her eyes welled with tears, but she steadied herself. "Because Emily believed in me. She treated me like more than an assistant, like family. I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent while he destroyed everything she stood for." I nodded slowly, swallowing past the lump in my throat. Emily's kindness, even in small gestures, had planted seeds of loyalty deeper than Ryan could ever understand. We went straight to Margaret's office. The moment she saw the folder, her eyes sharpened. She spread the documents across her desk, scanning each page with the precision of a surgeon. "This is enough," she said finally. "Combined with the patent sale, we can prove beyond any doubt that Ryan breached his fiduciary duty. But timing is everything." I frowned. "We have proof. Why not act now?" Margaret leaned back, tapping her pen against her chin. If we reveal this immediately, Ryan will still have allies, money, and the ability to spin the narrative. He'll claim misunderstandings, stall with expensive lawyers, and muddy the waters. But if we wait, if we allow him to present himself at the international conference as the sole heir and visionary, his arrogance will destroy him in public. It will be undeniable. Her logic was sound, but my chest tightened with conflict. Every day we waited meant more of Emily's legacy dragged through the mud. Patience, I muttered bitterly. Always patience. Laura shifted nervously. There's something else. He's planning to transfer millions into an offshore account this week. If he succeeds, he might still shield himself even if you expose him later. Margaret's eyes narrowed. She stood and paced the room before stopping abruptly. Then we need to act without him knowing. We can file a quiet injunction, freeze his assets temporarily. He'll believe the system is just moving slowly, but in reality, every cent will be locked. By the time the conference arrives, he'll be cornered. The plan was risky, but brilliant. It balanced Emily's strategy of patience with the urgency of stopping Ryan's theft. I sat back, thinking of her letter, her voice on the video. She had anticipated my impatience, even this very moment of doubt. I looked at Margaret and Laura, both waiting for my decision. My voice was firm. Do it. File the injunction. We'll wait for the conference, but Ryan won't steal another dollar from Emily's company. Margaret smiled faintly, her expression a mixture of relief and determination. Then it settled. By the time he steps on that stage, the ground beneath him will already be gone. That night, back in my motel room, I placed Emily's letter on the nightstand and opened my laptop to replay her video. Her face filled the screen, calm, certain, guiding. For the first time since she died, I felt not just grief, but partnership, as though we were still working side by side to protect what mattered most. I fell asleep with the image of her smile lingering in my mind. In my dreams, I saw her at her desk, the hum of the server in the background, her pen scratching across paper. She looked up at me and said, "Almost there, Dad." When I woke, the motel room was quiet except for the buzz of neon outside. The moment of reckoning was coming, and for once, I felt ready. The ballroom of the San Francisco Convention Center glittered with chandeliers and camera lights. Rows of banners announced the International Energy Innovation Conference, and the stage was lined with sleek screens displaying Cascade Innovation's new logo. I sat toward the back, hidden among hundreds of attendees, investors in tailored suits, journalists with cameras at the ready, and industry leaders who had once praised Emily for her vision. Today, they would see the truth. Ryan emerged from backstage to a wave of applause. He looked every bit the conquering prince, perfectly tailored suit, confident stride, a smile polished for the cameras. He waved broadly before gripping the podium, his voice booming through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, today marks the dawn of a new era. Cascade Innovations is no longer chained to outdated sentiment. Under my leadership, we will break boundaries, expand markets, and redefine the future of energy." I felt bile rise in my throat as he spoke of Emily's work as though it were an anchor dragging him down. On the screens behind him, glossy animations depicted futuristic projects he claimed were his ideas, though I recognized sketches Emily had once shared with me in the quiet of her study. He twisted her dream into a sales pitch. At first, the crowd clapped dutifully, hungry for the spectacle. Cameras flashed. Ryan basked in the spotlight, raising his hands like a man blessing his kingdom. But just as he began outlining his bold restructuring, I caught sight of Margaret near the side of the stage. She met my eyes across the crowded hall and gave a subtle nod. The moment had arrived. A pair of officials stepped forward, their suits plain but their expressions firm. They approached the stage and placed a folder in Ryan's hands. His confident smile froze. He glanced down, eyes scanning the first page, and I saw the blood drain from his face. The microphone picked up his stammer. This is a mistake." Reporters leaned forward, cameras zooming in. A murmur rippled through the room. Margaret stepped closer, her voice carrying clearly. "Ladies and gentlemen, What you are witnessing is not a mistake. These are injunctions filed by the Superior Court of California. They include asset freezes, evidence of embezzlement, and breaches of fiduciary duty. Gasps echoed across the ballroom. On the giant screens, documents began to appear. Emails showing Ryan transferring funds to shell companies, invoices for luxury cars, and the offshore account details Laura had uncovered. The evidence had been timed to the second, synced with Margaret's plan. "Mr. Peterson," a reporter shouted, "did you divert millions from Cascade Innovations? Is it true you sold intellectual property against the will's provisions?" another demanded. Ryan's voice faltered. "These are lies, distortions," but the words fell flat. Investors rose from their seats, some shaking their heads, others already walking toward the exits. His empire was dissolving before his eyes, not in private whispers, but under the glare of cameras and lights. I stood slowly, my legs steady for the first time in months. The crowd turned as I walked toward the front, not rushing, not gloating, but with the quiet dignity Emily had always embodied. Ryan's eyes met mine, wide, desperate, no longer triumphant. I took the microphone, my voice low but clear. Cascade Innovations was my daughter Emily's dream. She built it on responsibility, compassion, and vision. It was never about greed or spectacle. It was about building a future that mattered. The room erupted in applause, louder and more genuine than anything Ryan had drawn. Cameras flashed, not at him, but at me. For the first time since Emily's death, I felt her presence fill the air, her voice steadying mine. Laura, standing near the press table, raised her hand. "I worked beside Emily for 5 years," she told the reporters, "and I saw firsthand how Ryan dismissed her values and abused her company. Everything you've seen today is true. Her bravery sealed it. The story was no longer mine alone. It belonged to everyone who had believed in Emily." Ryan tried to speak again, but his words drowned beneath the clamor of reporters and the sound of security approaching. Within minutes, he was escorted off stage, his face pale, his future collapsing in real time. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. This wasn't triumph. It was justice. Emily's justice. As the crowd dispersed, Margaret pressed a hand to my shoulder. "It's done," she said softly. "The court has approved the activation of Emily's trust. You are the trustee now." Later that night, in the quiet of my motel room, I unfolded Emily's letter once more. My hands trembled, but my voice was steady as I whispered into the silence. "We did it, Emily. We did it together." The weeks following the conference felt strangely quiet, as though the world itself had exhaled. Ryan's downfall unfolded in the headlines: lawsuits, federal investigations, and the collapse of every alliance he had tried to build. Former investors distanced themselves overnight, reporters unearthed more of his excesses, and the once polished image of a rising star crumbled into dust. For me, it wasn't vindication, it was inevitability. Arrogance always devours itself in the end. With Ryan out of the way, the court finalized what Emily had planned. The Peterson Legacy Trust was activated, and I was named trustee. The title felt less like authority and more like duty. It meant carrying Emily's vision forward, not as an act of vengeance, but as a promise fulfilled. I moved into Cascade's old offices, though they looked nothing like the glossy, corporate halls Ryan had imagined. With Margaret's guidance, we transformed them into the headquarters of the foundation Emily had designed in her will. The sterile boardrooms became classrooms and labs. Instead of charts projecting profits, the walls now displayed photographs of young scholars, renewable projects, and community initiatives. One afternoon, I walked through a newly launched program where underprivileged teenagers tinkered with solar panels and computer kits. Their laughter echoed down the halls, pure and hopeful. I paused in the doorway, my heart swelling with something I hadn't felt in months: joy. Emily was there in every spark of curiosity, every bright-eyed smile. She had always believed that talent was universal, but opportunity was not. Now, through her trust, those doors were opening wide. At night, when the offices grew quiet, I often sat alone in the restored library, the very room Ryan had once wanted to gut. The oak shelves stood proud, lined with Emily's books, her notes, her favorite chair by the window. It had become a living space again, not of mourning, but of growth. I could almost hear her voice, calm, patient, urging me to trust the long game. The journey had not been easy. I thought back to those nights in the motel, the sting of humiliation, the gnawing doubts that I was simply too weak to act. Yet waiting had proven stronger than striking. By enduring, by trusting Emily's foresight, I had delivered justice in a way anger never could. One morning, Margaret handed me an envelope that had arrived anonymously. Inside was a clipping from a small-town newspaper in Oregon. My eyes narrowed as I saw the photograph. Ryan, thinner, paler, working as a clerk at a hardware store, no cameras, no investors, no applause, just a name tag and tired eyes. I studied the image for a long moment. Oddly, there was no satisfaction, no gloating triumph, only pity. His punishment was not poverty, but irrelevance. He had dreamed of empires and titles, but in the end, he was just another man stocking shelves, forgotten by the very world he once tried to conquer. I folded the clipping carefully and tucked it away. Emily had been right. Justice didn't require my rage. It required patience, strategy, and trust in the truth. Ryan had destroyed himself. I had only needed to wait for the moment when the world saw it too. As the months passed, I came to see that wealth was never the point. Money can be stolen, twisted, and wasted, but values, integrity, vision, compassion, those endure. Emily's greatest gift was not the fortune she left behind, but the principles she had lived by. They became the true inheritance, not just for me, but for every young person who would walk through the doors of the foundation. On a quiet evening, I stood in the study, sunlight streaming across the desk where Emily's photograph now rested. She was smiling in the picture, hair loose, the world at her feet. I placed my hand gently against the frame and whispered, "Justice isn't always loud, Emily. Sometimes, it's the quiet execution of a promise kept." The room was still, filled only with the warmth of fading light. I no longer felt like a man who had lost his daughter. I felt like a father entrusted with her legacy, carrying it forward into a future she had envisioned long before I ever understood. And for the first time, I felt peace, not because Ryan had fallen, but because Emily's dream was alive. In life, betrayal often cuts deepest when it comes from those who stand closest to us. The sting of greed, the blindness of arrogance, and the cruelty of selfish ambition can unravel not only fortunes, but the very bonds of trust that make us human. Yet history, both personal and collective, teaches us that truth has a way of prevailing. Wealth built on deceit is fragile, destined to collapse under the weight of its own dishonesty, while legacies grounded in honor and vision endure beyond the reach of time. The journey through grief and injustice reminds us of the quiet power of patience. Justice does not always arrive with the clang of gavels or the roar of crowds. More often, it comes in silence, unfolding slowly and deliberately, like dawn creeping over the horizon. To endure with dignity is not weakness, it is strength refined by wisdom. Sometimes the most powerful action is restraint, allowing arrogance to weave its own downfall. From this story emerges a universal lesson. Money is temporary, but values are eternal. Empires of wealth rise and fall, but integrity outlasts the richest treasures. The true inheritance we leave behind is not measured in accounts or estates, but in the lives we touch, the opportunities we create, and the principles we uphold when tested. Betrayal may wound, but it cannot erase the legacy of compassion and vision built with sincerity. In the end, justice is not about revenge. It is about restoration, restoring balance where arrogance sought to dominate, restoring dignity where cruelty tried to diminish, and restoring faith in what truly matters. Revenge feeds anger, but justice feeds hope. It transforms suffering into strength and loss into renewal. This story is a reminder that life's greatest battles are rarely won in moments of fury. They are won in the quiet perseverance of those who refuse to surrender their values, even when everything else is taken from them. True justice is not loud. It does not need to be. It is the calm, steady fulfillment of a promise, the quiet assurance that light will outlast shadow, and that legacies built on love and integrity will always endure. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage, it's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.